welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at MyAssays Desktop Enhanced Security.
Oh, very interesting.
And how it tackles data integrity and all those regulatory compliance things.
Yeah.
Specifically 21 CFR 11 and GxP.
Right.
And we're using MyAssay's own documentation, so we're getting the inside scoop straight from the source.
Yeah.
You know, these regulations, they're like the bedrock of trust when it comes to pharmaceuticals and healthcare. I mean, think about it. When you're dealing with, like, life-saving medications, you really want to be sure that the data behind them is, rock solid.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about that foundation, making sure that the data you're working with is reliable and accurate.
Exactly. So let's break it down a bit. What exactly are 21 CFR 11 and GxP, and why should our listeners care?
Okay, well, let's start with 21 CFR 11.
Okay.
It's a set of regulations that comes from the FDA.
Okay.
And it focuses specifically on electronic records and electronic signatures.
Right.
So imagine a clinical trial, right, where researchers are collecting all this data electronically. 21 CFR 11 basically sets the rules to make sure that all those electronic records are trustworthy, reliable, and just as good as paper records.
So it's all about making sure the digital world is held to the same standards as the paper world.
Exactly. You got it.
Okay, so that's 21 CFR 11. What about GxP?
Right. So GxP, that's more of an umbrella term.
Okay.
The G stands for good,
Yeah.
and the X represents a specific area. So you have GLP, GMP, things like that.
Good laboratory practice, good manufacturing practice. Got it.
Exactly. And they're all about quality guidelines and making sure things are consistent and reliable.
So it's like having those checks and balances in place at every stage.
Precisely. And that's where MyAssays Desktop Enhanced Security, MADS, steps in.
Right.
It's built with these regulations in mind, helping labs navigate this whole complex world.
Okay, so let's get specific. How does MADS tackle those 21 CFR 11 requirements? I know it's divided into three main parts.
You're right. There's Subpart A, general provisions, Subpart B, electronic records, and Subpart C, electronic signatures.
Let's start with Subpart A then. What are those general provisions all about?
Well, Subpart A kind of lays the foundation.
Okay.
It tells you what an electronic record and an electronic signature actually are, and what makes them trustworthy and reliable.
So it's setting the ground rules, making sure that a digital signature has to be as legally valid as a handwritten one, and electronic records have to be just as trustworthy as their paper counterparts.
Exactly, you got it. And a key way MADS does this is through a really strong audit trail.
Ah, the audit trail. We hear a lot about those.
Yeah, so every single action taken in the software, it's all logged.
Right.
It's like, a detective's notebook, keeping track of every move. This way, auditors, whether it's internal or from the FDA, they can see exactly what happened, when it happened, and who did it.
That level of transparency must be so valuable for labs working in a regulated environment.
Absolutely. It is.
You can prove that your data is accurate and hasn't been tampered with. Okay, let's move on to Subpart B, electronic records. What are the key things people need to know here?
All right, so Subpart B really dives into the whole life cycle of an electronic record.
Aye.
How it's created, modified, maintained, kept safe, the whole 9 yards.
Right.
It really gets into the nuts and bolts of how you ensure the data's integrity.
And from looking at the documentation, MADS seems to really shine here.
It does, yeah. One of the biggest things is being able to make exact copies of records, accurate and complete copies. This is important for backups, for disaster recovery, but it's also crucial for those FDA inspections.
Right.
They could ask for a specific record from 5 years ago.
Right.
You need to be able to pull that up, no problem, and MADS makes that super straightforward.
It's like having a super organized filing cabinet, but digital.
Exactly, and it goes beyond just simple storage. It protects the records throughout their entire retention period, making sure they stay accurate and can be retrieved whenever you need them.
So data storage and retrieval are covered. What about controlling who has access to the data? Not everyone in the lab should be able to see everything, right?
You're absolutely right. Limiting system access to authorized folks, that's another key part of Subpart B. And MADS handles this really well. It's got a really sophisticated user management system, so admins can control exactly who gets in and what they can do.
So it's like a really granular level of control.
Absolutely. You can create different groups, each with their own specific permissions.
Right.
Like you might have a group for analysts. They have full access to configure protocols, analyze data, the works.
Right.
But then you might have a group for technicians that can only run existing protocols, enter sample info, that kind of thing.
So everyone has access to what they need, but no one has more access than they should.
Exactly. And then, of course, you've got that audit trail, always watching, recording every login, successful or not.
It's like having a watchful guardian at the gate, making sure only the right people get in.
Right. Exactly. And more than just logins, it tracks every action that creates, modifies, or deletes a record.
So there's no question about when something was done or who did it. It's all right there in the logs.
Exactly, down to the precise timestamp, which is crucial for demonstrating compliance.
Because it's not enough to just say your data is accurate. You need to prove it.
Exactly. You need the evidence, and with MyAssays, you have it.
Okay, so we've covered how MyAssays handles creating, managing, and protecting electronic records.
Right.
But what about subpart C, electronic signatures? How does it handle that?
That's where things get even more interesting. Subpart C is all about the requirements for electronic signatures to be considered legally binding.
So how does MyAssays make sure those electronic signatures are up to snuff?
Well, the first thing is that each signature has to be unique to a specific individual.
Okay.
You can't just copy and paste them. Imagine if someone could just take your signature and slap it on any document.
That would be a disaster.
It would be chaos. So MyAssays prevents that by linking each signature to a unique user ID.
Okay.
And to add even more security, it uses two-factor authentication for signatures.
What does that mean?
So when you sign an electronic record, you need to enter both your username and your password.
So it's like having two locks on your door, making sure only you can get in.
Precisely. And MyAssays goes even further. It's got safeguards against unauthorized use of passwords and IDs. If there's any suspicious activity, like multiple failed login attempts, it gets flagged immediately.
So it's always on the lookout for potential security breaches.
Exactly. It can even lock out accounts after a certain number of failed attempts. It's like a security system on high alert.
That's impressive. So no more using password 123 for everything.
Nope, definitely not. It's all about staying ahead of those potential vulnerabilities and making sure only the right people can get to that sensitive data.
Okay, so it sounds like MyAssays takes security very seriously.
It really does.
Now, we've talked about how it specifically addresses those 21 CFR 11 requirements. What about GxP?
Right, so GxP, that's all about those broader good practices, those quality guidelines. The software doesn't directly enforce them, but it gives you the tools and the framework to help meet those GxP standards.
For example, that approved import folder we talked about.
Yeah.
That helps make sure the data is coming from a validated source.
Yeah.
Which is a huge part of data integrity in GxP.
Absolutely.
It's like setting a strict door policy at your lab, only allowing data from trusted sources to enter.
Exactly. And those comprehensive audit trails, they provide the documentation you need to show you're in compliance during those audits and inspections.
Right. It's not just about checking the boxes. It's about creating a culture of quality and compliance in the lab.
Absolutely.
So it's about building good habits and having the proof to back it up.
Exactly.
And MyAssays gives you the tools to do that. Now, I'm curious to see how this all works in practice. Let's go beyond the regulations and get into how MyAssays functions in a real lab.
All right, let's do it.
Let's jump into a real-world scenario and see how MyAssays works its magic.
Sounds good. So picture this. You're a researcher, you're in a busy lab, you've just finished running an ELISA assay,
Okay.
and you've got a whole plate of data that needs to be analyzed.
Sounds familiar. I've definitely been there.
Right. So where do you even begin with MyAssays?
Yeah, what's the first step?
Well, you're going to start with the MyAssays Desktop Explorer. Think of it as your command center.
Okay.
It's where you access everything. Your protocols, your results, your layouts, your reports, everything.
From what I've seen in the documentation, it looks pretty user-friendly.
It is, yeah. You've got tabs for everything, so it's easy to find what you need.
Yeah, like a well-organized lab bench, but in digital form.
Exactly. You can browse your protocols, preview results, manage layouts. It's all right there.
Okay, so let's say I want to analyze that data from my ELISA experiment. I would find the protocol in the Explorer, open it up, right?
Exactly. And once you do, you get this clear, organized view of your data. You're not just staring at a spreadsheet full of numbers.
Right.
MyAssays gives you all these different ways to visualize your data.
Oh, cool.
You can stick with the classic 2D view if you want.
Okay.
But you can also switch to a 3D view of the plate.
A 3D view.
Yeah, or even use a heat map
Right.
so you can really understand those trends and patterns and spot any potential issues.
Wow, a 3D view. That's cool. I can imagine that being really helpful. to see the data laid out like that.
It is. You can even rotate it by clicking and dragging. It's like you're holding the plate in your hand and examining it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've got my data visualized. What's next?
Well, before you dive into the analysis, you got to enter a few parameters, like the standard concentrations, dilution factors, sample IDs, all that good stuff.
Right. You have to tell the software what you did in the experiment so it can analyze it properly.
Exactly. And MyAssays makes this super easy. For example, with those standard concentrations, there's this feature called series. So instead of typing in each value manually, you just tell it the starting concentration and how it changes.
Oh.
The software does the rest for you.
That's so much faster, and I bet it reduces errors, too.
Absolutely. And here's a neat little detail. As you enter those concentrations, the wells on your plate layout, they'll actually flash on the screen.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so you can visually confirm you're editing the right values.
So it's like a built-in double check, which is always helpful.
Exactly. And when it comes to dilution factors and sample IDs, there are shortcuts for those too.
Okay, like what?
For dilution factors, you've got that same flexibility. You can enter them manually, copy and paste, or use that series option again. And for sample IDs, you can type them in, copy, paste, or even import them from a file.
Oh, nice. So it's flexible.
Super flexible. And don't forget about the import wizard we talked about earlier.
Right.
It's not just for measurement data. You can use it to import those standard concentrations, dilution factors, and sample IDs all at once.
So it's like a one-stop shop for getting all those experiment details into the system.
Exactly. Streamlines the whole process and minimizes those manual errors.
That's awesome.
But there's one important thing to remember. If you've got those enhanced security features turned on, like that approved import folder, you gotta make sure your files are in the right place before you try to import them.
Right. Those security measures are working in the background, keeping everything safe.
Exactly. Okay, so you've got your data in, parameters set, you're ready to see what those results tell you. Hit that calculate button and let MyAssays do its thing.
Sounds good. What kind of output do we get?
You get a really comprehensive report. It's all laid out in a clear way.
Okay.
You'll see your standard curve, a table with all your calculated results, and there's even a dedicated sheet for all those fit details.
Fit details.
Yeah, it's like a gold mine if you really want to understand the nitty-gritty of the analysis. It tells you all about those goodness of fit measures and how the standard curve was generated and applied to your data.
So it's not just a black box. You can see what's happening behind the scenes.
Exactly. You can really dig into the details and feel confident in those results.
I like that. What about exporting? Can I share these results with others, include them in reports, all that?
Absolutely. You can export in all kinds of formats: Excel spreadsheets, Word docs, even PDFs.
And I'm guessing there are options for customizing those reports too.
You bet. The export wizard gives you a ton of control. You can choose what data to include, tweak the layout, add your company logo, make it look all professional.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Nope. You've got the flexibility to create the reports that you need.
Okay, that's good.
But here's the really important part. Throughout this entire workflow, from importing that data to the final report, MyAssays is working behind the scenes to make sure everything is secure and compliant. Remember those user groups and permissions?
Right.
They're active throughout the entire process, controlling who can access and modify that data every step of the way.
So it's like having a built-in compliance officer, making sure everything is done by the book.
Precisely. If someone tries to do something they're not allowed to, like modify a protocol or access certain data, the software just won't let them.
It's that system of checks and balances that keeps everything safe and compliant.
Exactly. Now let's talk about another layer of security. Those audit trails and login logs. Remember that detective's notebook we talked about?
Yeah.
Well, here's where it really comes in handy. These logs, they provide a super detailed record of everything that happens in the software.
So everything's tracked.
Everything. Opening a protocol, changing user permissions, exporting data, you name it.
Wow.
It's all recorded in the audit trail.
So it's not just a list of who logged in and when.
Yeah.
You can see exactly what they did.
Exactly, step by step, with a timestamp for each action.
And what about the login log? What does that track?
That one focuses specifically on login attempts.
Okay.
Every attempt, successful or not, it's all there. So if there's any suspicious activity, like someone trying to log in with the wrong password over and over again, you'll know about it.
That's really important for catching those potential security breaches.
It is. And these logs aren't just about playing detective. They're crucial for showing you're compliant during those audits.
Yeah, right?
If someone asks how you make sure your data is accurate, you can point to those logs and say, look, we're tracking everything.
It's like having proof that you're serious about data security.
Exactly. And the level of detail in those logs is amazing. It's not just a simple list, it captures all the nuances. For example, let's say an administrator disables a user account.
Okay.
The audit trail doesn't just say account disabled, it'll tell you why it was disabled.
So if there are any questions later, you have all the context right there.
Exactly. Even something like a failed login attempt, it's not just, oh, someone failed to log in. You get the username, the time, the error message, the whole picture.
Wow, that's impressive. So how do you actually access these logs in MyAssays? Is it complicated?
Not at all. MyAssays makes it super easy. There's this tool called the Security Management Tool. It's like your control center for everything security related. You manage user accounts, configure security settings, and you can access those logs right from there.
But I'm guessing not just anyone can get into those tools.
You're right. Access to the Security Management Tool, it's restricted to administrators.
Makes sense. You don't want just anyone messing with those settings.
Exactly. So if you're an admin, you log in, open that Security Management Tool, and you've got those logs at your fingertips.
Okay.
And here's the cool part. Those logs, they're not just static documents.
Oh.
You can actually filter them by all sorts of criteria, like the date range, specific users, even the type of action.
So if I'm looking for specific events, I can narrow down the results.
Absolutely. It's like a search engine for your audit trails. And once you've found what you need, you can export it in different formats, CSV files, PDFs, whatever you need.
That's really convenient. It sounds like MyAssays really thought of everything when it comes to managing those logs.
They really did. It gives you the transparency and accountability you need.
All right, so we've seen how MyAssays handles all those security measures and those audit trails.
Right.
Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about flexibility. Labs can be so different, right?
Yeah, they are.
Different sizes, different research areas, different security needs.
Exactly. And that's where those configuration settings really come in. You can tailor MyAssays to match your lab's specific requirements. How users log in, how data is imported, how reports are protected. It's all up to you.
Okay, so let's talk about those configuration options. Where do we start?
Well, a good place to start is with authentication. How do you want your users to log into the system?
Right.
MyAssays gives you two main choices: Windows login or MyAssays login.
Okay, so what's the difference?
With Windows login, it's pretty straightforward. The software uses their existing Windows credentials to verify who they are. So if they're already logged into their computer, they don't need to enter a separate username and password for MyAssays.
That sounds convenient,
Well,
especially if everyone in the lab already has their own Windows account.
it is, yeah. It makes logging in super easy. But there are situations where a separate MyAssays login might be a better choice.
Like when?
Well, think about a lab where you have multiple people sharing a common Windows account, maybe to access a shared instrument or something.
Okay, yeah.
In that case, giving each person their own MyAssays login would give you that individual accountability, even if they're all using the same Windows account.
That makes sense. So it's like having your own key, even though you're entering the same house.
Exactly. So which one you choose really depends on your lab's specific setup and your security policies.
Right. It's all about finding the best fit.
Exactly. Okay, so you figured out how users are going to log in. What about the assay data itself? Where does that all get stored?
Yeah, good question.
MyAssays gives you two main options here: the user's own folder or a shared folder.
Okay, let's break those down. What's the user's own folder about?
Well, with that option, each user's data is tucked away in their own individual folder,
Okay.
usually within their My Documents folder.
So it's like a personal workspace.
Exactly. It's a good option if everyone's working on their own stuff and they don't need to share data all the time.
Right, but in many labs, people are collaborating. That's where the shared folder comes in, right?
You got it. With the shared folder, you can designate a central spot, like a network drive, where all the data lives.
So everyone can access the same protocols, results, and reports.
Exactly. It's like a central hub for all your lab data. And to make it even more secure, you can turn on this option called Secure File Protection.
Oh, what does that do?
It basically stops anyone from messing with the contents of that shared folder outside of MyAssays.
So even if they have access to the network drive where the data is stored, they can't just go in and change things directly.
Nope, they have to go through MyAssays, so everything is tracked and audited.
That's a great safeguard.
It is. Prevents a lot of headaches. And then there's that approved import folder we talked about earlier.
Right. That's all about controlling where the data comes from, right?
Exactly. You can restrict imports to a specific location, usually the folder where your instrument software spits out its data.
So you're basically saying, only trust data that comes from this source.
Exactly. It's like having a quality control checkpoint at the door. You don't want to accidentally import some random data from a USB drive or something.
Right. You need to make sure it's coming from a trusted source.
Exactly. That's how you maintain that data integrity.
Okay, that makes sense.
But remember, to make that feature really work, you need to configure those user group permissions properly.
Ah, right. So users can't just bypass the restriction.
Exactly. It's all about that layered approach to security.
Yeah.
Now, we've talked about securing those data imports, but what about the reports that are generated? How do you protect those?
Oh, yeah. How do we make sure those reports can't be tampered with?
Well, that's where the Word Excel report protection setting comes in.
Ah, yes, I remember that. Tell me more.
So with this setting enabled, when you export a report to Word or Excel, MyAssays automatically slaps a password on it.
So even if someone gets their hands on the file, they can't just open it and change the results.
Nope, they need the password. It's like locking those reports in a safe.
I like that.
And with Word reports, you've got even more control. You can choose to protect the whole document or just the results section.
Oh, that's interesting.
So someone could add comments or annotations without messing with the actual data.
So you get that flexibility while still maintaining the security of those results.
Exactly. It's that balance that MyAssays does so well.
Okay, so we've covered a lot here.
We have.
We've seen how MyAssays is designed to meet all those 21 CFR 11 requirements.
Right.
How it supports good practices in line with GxP.
Right.
And we even walked through a whole data analysis workflow and saw all the security features in action.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It is. And we've only scratched the surface of those configuration options.
Right. There's a lot more to explore.
But before we get too lost in the details, I want to circle back to data integrity. It's not just about meeting regulations. It's about ensuring that the data itself is high quality.
Right. Absolutely. It's about the spirit of the law, not just the letter of the law. And that's what makes MyAssays stand out. It's really about building that culture of data integrity.
Okay, so how does it do that? What are those key features that contribute to that?
Well, let's start with the concept of a secure handoff. It's all about protecting your data as it moves from the instrument to the software.
Okay, so that first step is crucial.
It's essential because if something goes wrong there, if the data gets messed up during that transfer, everything after that is compromised.
Right, like using bad ingredients. It doesn't matter how good of a cook you are. If the ingredients are spoiled, the dish is ruined.
Exactly. So how does MyAssays ensure that secure handoff? Well, one way is with a setting called Import Requires No Modification.
Okay, what does that mean?
Basically, it tells MyAssays to only accept files that haven't been changed since the instrument software created them.
So if someone tries to sneak in a modified file,
MyAssays will catch it and block it.
it's like having a bouncer at the door, making sure no one's sneaking anything in.
Exactly. And of course, any attempt to import a modified file, it's all logged in the audit trails, so you know who tried to do it and when.
It's like that security camera, always watching.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing there are even more robust options.
You're right. If you need that extra level of security, MyAssays has this feature called data certification.
Okay, tell me more about that.
So with data certification, each data file gets digitally signed using a certificate.
Oh, wow.
It's like putting a tamper-proof seal on your data. If anyone tries to change even a tiny bit of that file, that seal breaks, and MyAssays knows something's up.
It's like a digital fingerprint, uniquely identifying each file. What if my instrument software doesn't support this data certification thing?
No worries. MyAssays has a solution for that, too.
Okay.
They've got this separate tool called the MyAssays Security Injection Tool. It can add data certification capabilities to your existing instrument software.
So it's like giving your old instrument a security upgrade.
Exactly. So we've got our data safely imported into MyAssays, but data integrity doesn't end there, right?
No, it's an ongoing process. What happens after the data is imported?
You got to make sure that data stays secure and trustworthy throughout its entire life cycle, from analysis to processing to reporting, even archiving.
And MyAssays helps with all of that.
Every step of the way. Those audit trails, the user permissions, the electronic signatures, they all play a role in keeping that data safe and sound.
I see. It's all connected. It's not just a bunch of random features. It's a system.
Exactly. It's a system designed to protect your data from start to finish. And let's not forget about those electronic signatures.
Right.
They're not just for compliance, they also promote accountability. When someone signs off on a protocol or a results file, they're saying, this is accurate, I stand behind this.
It's like a stamp of approval.
Exactly. And because those signatures are electronically linked to the data, they can't be forged or removed.
So there's a clear record of who approved what and when.
Precisely. So if any questions come up, you've got that undeniable evidence. And remember those reports?
Yeah.
Protecting them from modifications outside of MyAssays is another way to ensure that the findings you share with others are accurate.
So that integrity is maintained even after the data leaves the software.
Exactly.
Well, I think this has been a fantastic deep dive. We've really gone deep into MyAssays Desktop Enhanced Security.
We have. We started with those complex regulations,
Yes.
then we saw how the software meets those requirements,
Right.
and then we really explored how it all comes together to create this culture of data integrity in the lab.
It's been a great journey. We've learned so much, and I'm sure our listeners have too. So, to wrap things up, I just want to say that in today's world, where data is everything, ensuring its integrity is absolutely crucial.
Absolutely. It's the foundation of good science, reliable results, and informed decisions.
Well said. And tools like MyAssays are essential for helping labs achieve that. So to our listeners, if you're working in a regulated environment or you just care deeply about the quality of your data, we highly recommend checking out MyAssays Desktop Enhanced Security. It's more than just a compliance tool, it's a partner in your pursuit of scientific excellence. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.